Today is May 11th, 2017. I'm Adrienne Falaise, and I'm here with Rita Lakin for The Interviews, an oral history project of the Television Academy Foundation and for the Writers Guild Foundation, and we're here in San Rafael, California.
Okay.
All right, we're rolling.
Okay, thanks so much for sitting down with us today, Rita. So we'd like to just start right at the beginning. So what was your name at birth?
My name at birth was Rita Weisinger
And when and where were you born?
in the Bronx, in New York City,
What year?
1930.
Did you grow up in that area as well?
Yes, I did.
And what were your parents' names?
Gladys and David.
And what did they do for a living?
My dad was a plumber. My mother was a housewife. That's what you did in those days.
Did you have any siblings?
I have one sister, Judy,
Older or younger?
younger.
What traits do you think you inherited from your parents?
From my father, I learned how to go to a racetrack and handicap horses. That was a very good thing to know. And from my mother, I learned to try to stay away from beauty parlors.
What were some of your interests when you were little?
Reading. I lived at the library, so I think you'll hear that from lots of writers.
Any particular kind of books?
Well, the ones I remember from my childhood was the Blue Fairy book, the Red Fairy book, the Green Fairy book, you know, all of the fairy tale books. I think I read everything that wasn't nailed down. I read cereal boxes, you know, that kind of thing.
Did you do any writing when you were little?
Not when I was very little. I once set the kitchen on fire. Does that count?
Let's hear that story.
That's true. I was like maybe not even 7, and we had a newspaper on the table and candles that were lit on the table, and I was turning the page, and gee, the candle fell over, and I must have been a very interesting child, and I didn't know it because I ran into the bathroom. My mother was next door talking to the neighbors, and I ran into the bathroom and jumped into the tub because I figured the fire would go into the tub.
That's reasonable.
Then I remembered to yell. And my mother, of course, was 2 inches away. She came running by and ran back. So that was me learning to read at a young age. I read the newspaper, I read books, I read everything I could.
Did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
No, not at all.
Do you remember the first time you saw television?
Yes, it was the beginning of television, and we had a neighbor who had one of these little teeny television sets, and the Milton Berle show was on, and all the neighbors came in, and we all brought food, of course, and we all sat on the couches and chairs and watched Milton Berle.
What did you think of television?
I didn't think of it at all. It was just something. I saw it, and then I forgot about it.
So where did you go to college?
In New York City, Hunter College.
And what did you study there?
Literature. And then I decided I should become a teacher, so I took all the courses I needed to teach. And that was an interesting experience because Hunter College was an all-female college. And there was a war on, and the war had ended. And then all these men were coming back, and they had GI Bills to send them to school. And they turned Hunter College into co-ed. So I was there at a historical moment, and it was also hysterical because all these boys were in the college and all these girls were going crazy. And one of the boys who came home and went to our college, it's a fascinating story, he changed his name to Hunter, Evan Hunter. I do remember that name. But that's not what his name was. And he became very famous. And I remembered it. Okay, that's what I remember from Hunter College. It was a great school.
What were your recollections of the war years, just a little bit? What was that period like for you?
Which period?
During World War II? Do you remember Pearl Harbor happened?
Well, yeah, I remembered sort of. You know, you remember your parents talking in whispers and listening to the radio a lot, the radio, right? Mm-hmm. So I heard about the bombing of Pearl Harbor, but I think I was 13, 12 or 13, yeah. And it was very interesting. It was a time that was unique. We were teenage girls, my friends and I, and we used to look at all the sailors walking by and giggling, you know. But we were kept away from the knowledge of what was really going on. Our parents talked about it but I wasn't in the room, you know, stuff like that. So, it was, and the only other way was going to the movies and seeing newsreels, which they always had, and they would show what was going on in the war. But it was, you know, just over there somewhere. It didn't really affect me as a child.
Mm-hmm. So how did you start to get into writing?
I think I was always writing something or other. I thought I was writing some poetry when I was young, which was probably awful. And I started writing short stories. So that was what I did. I was starting to write short stories. But at that time, I didn't know that you did anything with them. So that was about it. Until I got married, and then I had a best friend, and she and I used to write short stories all the time, and we actually got to sell them. And I think I made 27 cents on my first book, $27. 27 cents. Anyway, somebody had told me that if you want to sell stories that are action adventure, they don't buy from women. So in those days, you know, women only stayed home. So they said, if you want to sell something, don't give them your real name. So my first story, which I have a copy of right behind me somewhere, went to a magazine called Manhunt, and I was R.W. Lakin. By that time I was married. And that's how I got sold. They didn't know that I was a female.
Wow. So how did you start writing for television then?
Well, that's a long, detailed story. I was already married. I had one child, and we moved to Los Angeles because he had this incredible job, and he was a physicist. And, well, I don't deal with this too much. He died very young, and I was left with 3 very small children. And I had to go to work. And that's an interesting story in itself, because I didn't know anybody who went to work. All my friends were housewives. And I didn't want to work in Woolworths. I didn't know what to do. I was also grieving, and I don't think I was thinking straight anyway. So I went to all the movie studios and tried to get a job. And then I did get a job at Universal as a secretary. And from there it was very interesting, because I wasn't making that much money, and I was reading all these scripts. And I thought, well, I wrote short stories, maybe I could learn to write a script. So I bought a book. You know, if you want to learn how to cook, you buy a book. So I bought this book, Teleplay, and it gave me all my instructions. It told me what I should do and what the shots would be in television. And I thought of going into television, because movies, there were very much fewer movies being done. And I thought if this was television, I would have a chance, because there was a lot of air to, you know, film. So I started, I learned from Teleplay, and I should have a script ready, because one of these days the door is going to open, and I've got to be ready when opportunity knocks. And he said that in his book, when opportunity knocks, you have to be ready. So I start watching TV, and the show that I thought was really interesting was Ben Casey. So I wrote a big script for Ben Casey, and I studied it, and we didn't have anything like videos, and we didn't have cassettes to save anything on, so I would sit there every Tuesday, Monday night, whatever it was, and write things down, and I got to do the characters, and I was really learning what I had to learn. And lo and behold, I have this job at Universal, and I'm working for these two young, wonderful men, Ned Tannen and Dale Sheets. And they were wonderful. They encouraged me. They caught me reading scripts from the Universal mailing thing. I had to mail scripts to me every day, and my boss has said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm trying to teach myself to write." That's great. That's great. Go ahead, do it. And these agents would come in all the time, and Dale would say to them, "Here's a new writer for you." You know, and usually people ignored me, but in came this guy Mel, and he really wanted my boss to give him business. So when Dale said, "Oh, she's a really good writer," he said, "What am I going to do with her? There are no women writers." He said, "I don't have any women writers." He says, "Can't she find a man to write with?" And he was naming the couples that at that time were writing together, and they were like two couples, maybe three. And so he said, "All right, I'll take your script home and I'll read it." And I thought I'd never hear from him again. And lo and behold, he comes up and says, "You know, I've got you a job. Maybe we're going to go to Richard Chamberlain's show." And I prepared for it. I was very upset because I had written for Ben Casey, and the characters were entirely different for Dr. Kildare. And I practiced in front of a mirror all these story ideas I was going to try to sell, and at that time there were all these TV guides, and I was trying to read up on all the plots that they had done before. So we went into this meeting, and there was David Victor, who I learned later was one of the most amazing men, because all he did is give people starts in the business. I mean, he was just amazing. So what happened was, I walk in the room, and there's David Victor, who looks like he could have been Santa Claus. He was this, you know, darling, roly-poly, cheerful guy, and then this very nice-looking young man was there. And I was very nervous, and I kept trying to pitch ideas, and they said, "No, we've done that. No, we've done that. No, no, sorry, we've done that." And I was introduced to the young man and the other person in the room, and it was this
Sidney Pollack.
Sidney Pollack, who was going to direct my show. Now, Sidney Pollack was his first job.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he was very, very nice. And they both were very helpful to me. You know, I'm sure my first draft must have been horrible, but they were very good. They helped me, they gave me advice, they did all kinds of things. And then I met this little kid who was going to play the son in this thing. And of course, wouldn't you think that my agent, Mel Bloom, had said to David Victor, "Be nice to her, she's a widow, and she's trying to take care of her 3 children." So what did he want me to write about? It was a woman who becomes widowed. And I thought, oh boy, that's what they did. They knew about me, and that's what they wanted. And so I met this little boy, Ron Howard. Ron Howard. So I think he was 7, maybe 8. And I think he was already a star. He was Opie on this other show. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so it was an amazing experience, a first-time job. And everything went very well.
So how did you find the format? Did you find it was easy for you to write for television?
Yeah, actually, because writing short stories was more difficult to me, because I had to describe everything and, describe the characters, describe the rooms, I love television. You just called somebody up and said, give me a car, or give me makeup, give me hairdos. And it was all dialogue, and I thought, this is wonderful, because this somehow or other was easy for me to do. And I did. And my best friend, Doris, who I was writing short stories with, was very angry with me because I no longer wanted to do the short stories. And she couldn't stand the idea that I would write for television, which at that time was not considered. The intelligentsia didn't watch television, Smart people were not supposed to watch television. So she was very annoyed with me. But I said to her, I've got to make more money than $27. So that was the beginning.
So then from there, you wrote a number of freelance episodes
Yeah, I did.
earlier in your career.
Yeah, I did quite a few.
Was it a similar process to what you went through with David Victor?
No, every process was different because every producer was different. And some of them were surprised to see a woman walk in the room, and others were okay.
So let's talk about a couple of those shows that you did some episodes for. One of them was Bob Hope Presents Chrysler Theater. You wrote a draft of The Shattered Glass.
Oops.
There's a story there.
Yeah, there's a big story there. Yeah, I unfortunately for me, that Bob Hope Theater was using the most famous writers in the world, the most famous directors in the world, and the most famous actors. And unfortunately for me, somebody wrote this wonderful article in Variety all about me and how I was a housewife and a mother and blah, 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 and a secretary. And my script was written and everybody loved the script and everything was fine until the actress came on and she said, no, 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 I'm not going to have a script from a secretary.
And that was Shirley Jones, I think?
You said it, I didn't. I'm sure, she meant well. I'm sure she wasn't trying to be cruel. I'm sure if I'd had a chance to talk to her, maybe it would have been okay, but it was, in those days I didn't talk to anybody about anything because I just was hanging on to a job. I didn't know about politics, and I certainly didn't know that there were any women around, so I didn't do anything about it, and I got totally rewritten by Sterling Silliphant, who was a very good writer, but he only had a half weekend to write an entire script, so it didn't come out very well. And it got terrible reviews. And both Sterling and I were blamed for giving the wonderful actress such a horrible script. But that was okay. It was my realization I was not going to be an overnight success. It was going to take a little longer.
Another episode that you wrote was for Daniel Boone, The Reunion, 1965.
You really are getting me to talk about the ones that didn't work. That was such a funny one because I couldn't imagine writing a Western. I never watched Westerns. I didn't think I would like Westerns. I just, what did I do? I read up on all the Western ideas I could find, and I couldn't find an idea of a character. They said, come up with a character, because every show has a visiting character. And I just couldn't think of one. Finally, I found this very esoteric little character. It was a Jewish peddler who went into the woods selling goods to the people who were crazy enough to be living in the woods in those days. And because he didn't want to eat food that wasn't right for him, he carried hard-boiled eggs in his pocket. So he was called an egg eater. And when I pitched this idea, the producer said, oh, that's really interesting. And so I wrote my script. And since I was still a real newcomer, I didn't have the kind of thing I had with David Victor, where they read every script and every draft and gave me advice on what was good, and it was always a first draft, a second draft, and a final. It didn't register that after I turned in this script to Daniel Boone that I never heard from anybody again. And I didn't think about it because I was busy trying to get other jobs. And then all of a sudden I read in the TV Guide that my show was on. And I thought, oh my God, my show is on. So I think my sister and I watched it. I think, thank goodness, I didn't invite anybody over. And we watched the show, and we're watching the show, and there's no egg eater. There's an Irish tinker, the long-lost father of the leading lady on the show. So that was my second failure. Moving on, you want to find some more failures to discuss?
Well, but you're learning things as these
yes,
happen, right?
These
are the lessons you're accumulating?
I certainly was learning things.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing I was learning is to find out what happens to your script.
Mm-hmm.
That was a good lesson.
So did you prefer having multiple drafts then with lots of notes back?
But legally, we had to do that. I mean, that's how we were paid. First draft, final draft, and rewrite, if I'm remembering correctly. So I was surprised when I never got called in to do my rewrite. And then I didn't even think about it because I was still really so new in the business that I didn't think about it at all.
So then 1965, you got your first job as a staff writer on Peyton Place.
Yeah, but I did things, other freelance things as well.
Some other freelance episodes.
Yeah.
Are there any that you recall?
Well, yeah, the one that was where I did Death Takes a Holiday, which
that was a little later, I think,
wasn't that
in the 70s, maybe.
Yeah, it could have been.
Yeah, I think that was 71. We'll get to there. So we'll move on to Peyton Place then. How did you get that role, that job as a staff writer on Peyton Place?
I went to a party and I met the producer of the show.
Paul Monash?
No, that's Paul Monash. I think my agent got me that job.
Mel Bloom?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And I went to, and I finally felt that I really was a writer and I really would have a career doing this. And so this was my first staff job, and I was very excited about it because I was going to be working with other writers. And from what I understood, there was 7 of us, I think, if I remember correctly. And lo and behold, I walk in and there are 3 women. And it's the first time I'd seen any women writers anywhere. And they were wonderful, and we got along amazingly right away. I think they were as glad to see me as I was glad to see them. And they each were very, very different than one another. And there were also, I think, 4 men. So there were all of us. That was 7 with me, 8, I think. And it was the best job I ever had, ever, because all we ever did was laugh and have fun. And I was the oldest one. I was in my 30s. And all of them were in their 20s. I mean, they were young kids, and they were all starting out, and they were very excited, and it was just, and Paul Monash was a lot of fun. I mean, he was such a character. He was always calling meetings. All he wanted was have meetings, and then he would talk forever about the theory of writing and on and on and on. But then at the very end, he would tell us what he really wanted from us. And we took turns writing scenes. We actually didn't write scripts, which was never done before, or I think ever again in Hollywood. They had 3 people, one of them was a woman, and they came up with the story ideas. And then they came to the writers and they handed us out our scenes to write, which was kind of interesting. And but then again, we had to read each other's work to make sure we were all writing the same show. And after a while, we got so good at it that we couldn't even tell who wrote which script, because we had come up with a style that worked for everybody, and was just a best fun time ever.
Did you all work together in one writer's room?
One writer's building. It was called the Old Writers Building on the Fox Lot. It was a very famous building. No, we all had our own offices, and I used to take a nap every afternoon and tell my secretary, "Don't bother me." That was really good. That lasted 2 years, and then I moved on.
So had you seen the show before coming to work on it? Because I think it had been on the air already.
Oh, it was on the air already. I'm sure I must have watched it. I think I was in their second season of it.
Yeah.
When they got so famous that they went 3 nights instead of 2. And then I forgot what the truth of it was. They were half-hour shows in black and white. You know, what was the big deal? How hard would that be to write?
Well, how about that pace, though? If it's on 3 nights a week at that point, how quickly are you guys turning out
We
scripts?
were just turning them out very easily.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and reading each other's stuff and laughing and telling them what we'd walk in and say, "Don't do this now because we have this character doing it, so don't do it in your script." You know?
Mm-hmm.
So we had that going on all the time. It was just wonderful.
Did you spend any time on set?
Not very much.
Mm-hmm. Did you have much interaction with the cast members?
You know, I still had the newcomer woman attitude. Still, I hardly visited sets, but by now I started to watch the dailies. By now I at least knew enough to do that. I think the boys went on the sets a lot because there was Mia Farrow and other women there. They loved going on the sets.
And what were you learning from watching the dailies?
What worked and what didn't, and how important editing was. I learned a lot. I didn't know it, but I was learning a lot everywhere I went because it was all new.
Mm-hmm. So Mia Farrow did famously cut her hair quite short. Were you there during that time?
Yes, I was. But we were all not there. We were all outside doing other things, and our secretary called us up hysterically and said, "Come back, come back, emergency." We had a code. I think it was Code Red. It was something like that. And we came back, and of course, Mia Farrow denied it in the trade. She said it wasn't really that big a fight, but I don't know. It must have been a big enough fight, so she cut all her hair off. And so we all had to run back and come up with a new story. So we came up with a story that she had a car accident, and we had brain surgery, and we had to cut off all her hair. To this day, I'll never understand why they didn't just put her in a wig. I mean, we had to go through so much trouble with that hair. And then she came out of it with this very, very short haircut, which then became the style all over the country. Mm-hmm. That's when I saw what the stars could accomplish, how important they were.
Did you ever get any network notes or problems with censorship on Peyton Place?
Always got network notes, all the time. We tried to get around it. We tried to use hip words that they wouldn't know that had double entendre. Those boys were really funny. They all became very famous writers, and they were very funny. We would see what we could get away with, and we did. I'm telling you, it was a fun experience. It never happened again. Not like that.
Are there any favorite storylines or episodes that you recall from your 2 years?
No, they all blended.
Meld together, yep. Yeah. So did you just have a 2-year contract? Is that why you left after those 2 years?
Yeah, my contract was up.
Mm-hmm.
And I should have stayed, but I wanted to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
I think I didn't stay longer than 2 years on anything. I think I just kept wanting to go.
Yeah. So there was a TV movie in 1985, Peyton Place: The Next Generation.
Yeah,
were you involved in that?
Yes, I was. They asked every other writer, and they all said no. So I said yes. And that was okay.
Yeah.
I had to come up with this ridiculous plot because we couldn't get Allison, and we couldn't get Ryan O'Neill, who played the boyfriend. So we had to make sure they were dead. And I had to and they had been killed, and it was a murder mystery. Who shot Allison before Dallas?
So what do you think the legacy of Peyton Place is? It was kind of the first primetime soap
It was
opera.
a very first time soap opera that was so successful that all the rest of them followed. I mean, it was such an amazing success. The actors all became world famous, you know.
Yeah.
I think so. I think that was the one that stood out among all the rest of them.
Yeah.
And Paul Monash was really very good at it. He was very smart. I forgot how many years the show went for, but it's in my book somewhere.
Yeah, I think it ran until 1969.
Yeah, it was around quite a while.
So then, in 1967, you were hired as head writer on the daytime soap opera, The Doctors.
Well, that was a funny experience.
Tell us.
Well, by then I really had a career, and I was writing a lot of movies for television and doing a lot of good stuff. But my folks lived in New York, and somehow or other I was never finding time to go visit. So this show was in New York, and it was a daytime soap, and this weird guy, Oren Tovrov, came to LA, and he called every writer in the Writers Guild to a party at the Beverly Hills Hotel. And of course, every writer came, free drinks, free food, and not one of them intended to go to New York and write a soap opera. And I'm saying to myself, well, it's only 6 weeks. And I said, wait a minute, it's 6 weeks in New York. That's great. My kids can visit their grandparents, and there's so much to do in New York City, and it's going to be wonderful. So I took a job that nobody else would ever take. And it was quite a funny experience, because I never got to see my children except once. And Gavin got to play a part once as a patient in the and he complained later that he never got any lines. And I tried to explain to him that he couldn't get any lines. They weren't going to pay for his lines. And so that was the day they came down to the set to visit me, my mother and father and my kids. And Gavin did his little stint as the patient in the hospital, and then they all wanted to go to Central Park or do all these things. And I couldn't leave because I had this crazy job where I was supposed to have been given other writers to write the show. I was supposed to be the head writer. But this Oren Tavra was a real slime bag. He had gotten a nighttime writer, and he didn't want any other writers. And I was writing all the shows. And that's 5 shows a week, every week. And so I never got out of that little apartment that I sublet. And the restaurant downstairs, the very famous deli, Carnegie, thank you, brought me breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. And I just was turning out these scripts. I never got to go anywhere or do anything. And my kids had to go to school in New York, and I don't think they liked it very much.
So how are you coming up with ideas for all of these episodes?
You just do.
Yeah.
You're a writer, you come up with them. You have a hospital, you have characters in the hospital, you have patients, and you make up stories. And there's a gazillion doctor shows, so apparently there's a million stories.
Now, how did you feel about writing for a daytime soap after coming from a primetime soap?
Well, I had the same attitude everybody had, that daytime was way below nighttime in quality. And in a sense it was true, because you had 5 shows a week, one every day. So what you might have done on television in 5 minutes on a nighttime show, you stretched out to a week. So it was very easy. It was very easy to write.
So
and it was half hour. I mean, for God's sakes, you know.
What was your process for writing? Did you outline or use note cards?
Well, in that job, I couldn't process anything. I just had to sit down by the seat of my pants and knock out a script. And by the end of the 6 weeks, I was talking into a machine, And then somebody would come up and pick up my tape recorder and run over to the studio and type it up, because I was writing them all. Do the math. I can't do the math. It's 5 times a week.
That's a lot. So I had read that one of the directors actually started to write some scripts with you.
Yeah, he did. He was the one who knew the whole story about the truth about why they wanted a nighttime writer, because the show was about to be canceled. And so he told me that that's why they went to get a nighttime writer, and I did save the show.
You did go from worst to first.
I'm sorry?
Went from worst to first.
Oh, yeah.
So the ratings increased
a lot.
lot.
The rating was just about in Cancelville. And it was easy to write for it. It was the #1 show when I walked off.
Wow.
And it just took a little good writing. Apparently it was terrible stuff. So it was okay. I mean, you know, they were always drinking coffee at the nurse's station. How hard was it to make up stuff? So
did you like doing the serialized content, like over time,
I
revealing
loved
a
it.
little bit
I loved
here and
it.
there?
I tried a number of times to develop shows that would take novels. And it seemed to be the most obvious thing in the world is to take a novel and make a show out of a novel, and nobody would do it at that time. But meanwhile, I talked to Rick Edelstein, the director, and made a deal with him, because he was the one who told me everything that had gone on. I said, what do I do now? I have a contract to fill. He said, I'll write it with you. I said, okay, you're on. So he wrote half of them, and I went home and went back to my life, and he called me up and say, it's your turn, and I would take over again. I mean, writing for it was so simple, simplistic in those days. I'm sure it changed.
Is that something you enjoyed about it, though, or were you looking for more of a challenge in the writing?
No, I think I was just doing what I always do, is just what's the next job. Oh, God, I need a drink. Okay, where are we?
Okay, so now we're going to move on. You actually wrote an episode of Family Affair in 1968.
I wrote 2 of them.
You wrote 2 of them?
Yeah, and I don't remember a thing about it other than they were very nice people, and it was very cute, and they were also very simple to write.
So that was a different kind of show than you had been writing. That was
It was the only
right?
sitcom I've ever written. I hated sitcoms.
Why?
Why? Because they were stupid. They wanted stupid people saying stupid things at all times. I didn't want to do that. I don't even know how I got this job. I guess the producer must have got to me. And he wanted a couple of ideas, and the characters were very charming, and it was easy to do.
So then 1969, you became a story editor on Mod Squad.
Yeah. A point here is about the whole idea about women. Little by little, I was starting to see that there were a few women, especially the ones I met on Peyton Place. And I think everything that I'm saying and the way I responded to things had to do with the fact that I didn't really think I belonged there, because it was a man's world. I mean, I was always working with men, and except for Peyton Place, when I actually could work with women, and it was so wonderful. So all of these jobs, I felt like I did the job, and I didn't really get into the business until I got into Peyton, until Mod Squad.
So what was it about Mod Squad that you actually felt you fit?
Well, because I was inside. I was not just I wasn't a writer for Mod Squad per se. I was a story editor. I was now on the business end. And it also was my introduction to Aaron Spelling, who was very much in my writing life. And he welcomed me. He was so nice to have a beautiful woman come on the show. He didn't mention anything about writer or story editor. So that's when I really decided I really wanted to learn the business. And that's where I could, because I could study everything. I was with the producers all the time, and I was on the set a lot, finally. And I was rewriting scripts. So I really, that's where I learned all the things that the producers do.
So what is the role of a story editor? What were your specific duties?
Well, the story editor was that they would get a script from a writer and they weren't happy with it and they wanted it rewritten. So guess who got to rewrite it? And the truth of it is, and that's why what happened later on and now, that staff writing on practically every show, because there's a consistency. The writers who came in outside to write a show never quite got it, because there was a consistency to the mood of the thing, the actors themselves, the way they played parts. And of course, being there, I knew it. I knew how to write for these characters. The outsiders thought they could write for them and couldn't. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that was the job. I was rewriting writers. And then I wrote a couple of my own scripts.
So when you came on, had Mod Squad been on the air already?
It was a successful show.
Mm-hmm. So had you seen it then?
Not really. I thought it was a rather stupid idea. Honestly. Thank you. But it wasn't hard to write. I mean, once I realized who the characters were supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall how you got the job on that show?
Oh, do I have to go through the Harv Bennett story? Yes, I went to a party in my neighborhood, and he showed up, and everybody in the neighborhood was so excited because a real live producer was there, and I got to meet him, and he found out that I had all those credits already, and he said, "Do you want a job on the show?" And I said, "Yeah." I hardly ever said no. Seriously, because in my mindset, this was something I was doing. I had to earn money, so we lived. So, and then it turned out to be pretty much a turning point, because of meeting Aaron, who I worked with many times, and writing the Mod Squad script that was considered the best thing I'd ever done. I didn't think it was the best thing I'd ever done, but it got incredible reviews.
So this is In This Corner, Saul Albert?
In This Corner, Saul Albert, yeah.
And what was that episode about?
Well, it was me being, what's the word for what it was? I was writing about downtrodden people living in terrible circumstances, and they needed somebody to help them and save them. I didn't know I was doing something new for television, that this was not just a Mod Squad story where they went out and they got the bad guys and they got back. This was a story about real issues that didn't have answers. And I came up with an answer that I made up, and it was considered so amazing that it got write-ups all over the whole United States. And it got me a nomination for a Writers Guild Award. Anyway, that's as much as I want to say on that subject.
Sure.
Okay.
So did the success of the episode boost your career? Were you getting different opportunities after that?
Probably. I was getting better and better things. I was doing a lot of movies in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And other pilots for shows that didn't sell. But, what? Except for the rookies.
We'll definitely get there.
The rookies is a great story.
I want to talk a little bit more about, you mentioned Aaron Spelling. So what were your initial meetings with him like?
Well, Aaron Spelling was quite a character. I mean, he was a skinny little guy, and spoke with this sweet Southern accent. He was just ever so charming. And he started up came from the South, obviously. And he was an actor first, but he was obviously very smart, and he got to be very successful. And he had one idea that he carried through all the time: gorgeous women and gorgeous men looking gorgeous and doing exciting things. And that's show after show after show, that's what he did. So here I am, mischanged the world that I didn't know I was trying to do. He calls me in to write a movie. And so I come up with some of the stupid ideas that he didn't want anyway. And finally I told him I had an idea about a woman who goes into a jail because she's a social worker, and women in the jail are dying, and she wants to find out. Well, Aaron immediately got excited. In his mind, he was seeing women in the jail taking their clothes off. I didn't know that's what he was thinking, but he thought it was a great idea. So here I was doing now another movie about something meaningful. And the first thing I said to him is, she's going to go into this jail, and of course what's going to happen is she can't get out again, because the one and only person who knows she went into this jail to help her women is now dead. So we're talking now. I'm in meetings. I'm this big shot writer, and so I say to him, please, Ida Lupino is a great actress. She just did a movie where she plays the prison guard who beats up all the girls. Please don't hire an Ida Lupino. So the first person he hired was, of course, Ida Lupino, who did it exactly the same way she did it in that other movie, where she was beating up all the girls.
And this was Women in Chains?
This was Women in Chains, which became the #1 movie for 5 years. It was the top movie people watched, full of violence that I didn't want. But it was an experience. It was very well directed by the director whose name I'm not remembering, and very good director. And it was very successful, but I was not very happy with it because I didn't want it to be the same movie that Ida Lupino had just finished.
So I have Bernard Kowalski?
Yeah, Kowalski. He was a very successful TV director. Did a great job. Anyway, that was my next Aaron Spelling event. So I kept trying to change him, and he wouldn't change. I mean, you should see the hairdos of the women in the prison, you know, in the makeup. They look gorgeous. You don't see prisoners as pretty as that.
Were you on set for filming?
Not much. Not much. I was really constantly trying to go home and be at home.
Yeah. Just to go back to Mod Squad for a second, you said that's when you really started to be involved in production more.
A lot, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what you learned about production on that show.
Well, I think I pretty much said so. I was going to the rooms where they were going through all the film and sitting in all the dailies, and you know, just seeing how everything got put together. And I was finally going to the meetings, which in the first one I went to was the meeting when they met to discuss how to do my Mod Squad.
So the read-through?
Yeah,
table read?
The read-through. The production meeting.
So that's where they mark up the script and
Yeah,
they say makeup needs this.
Which was a very funny experience for me.
Yeah.
Because everybody was there. Transportation, makeup, hairdos, you know, blah, blah, blah. There was a huge amount of people. And Aaron and the director, who happened to be Bob Lewis, who I later married, and we are not going to discuss that, they were talking about, they were going page by page. We need a truck here, and we need a dirty room here, and we need this here, and we need that. And every time it came to the dialogue, they would go, words, 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 words. And that was a revelation to me, that production was not the least bit interested in the words. It was all about the production. And that was a very funny experience. So I never forgot words, words, words.
So did you start to have ideas about being a producer at that point? Did that come later?
No, that came later with the same revolution that was starting to happen in the business. And certainly Stephen Bochco was way, way at the forefront of it. This was the idea now, if you wrote a script that they bought for the first time ever, the networks finally figured out if they wanted the script done right, they should have the writer who did the script be in the production. And that was the beginning of that job.
A showrunner.
Showrunner. That was the beginning. But funnily enough, I became a showrunner before Stephen Bochco became a showrunner.
And we are
But
going
it was
to get to that.
it was the same idea, because
Yeah.
I wrote, came up with an idea for a series that they wanted me to write, which was Flamingo Road. Yes. And that was the time when my son finally got into the business, and so Howard got to write the pilot script. And they asked me to produce the show for the same reason I just said. Suddenly they discovered that if they wanted the show to succeed and they wanted some continuity in a show, what you want to do is get the writer to be the head of it. And that was the beginning of a huge change that's gone on forever in television. And Stephen Bochco really made that happen. I did it on my small little way, not making waves because I was a woman, you know, kind of thing. So I was the producer of this show.
You're also the first woman showrunner.
Yeah, I was the first woman showrunner, but nobody knew that. We had no words for that. I was just, first of all, the first time they gave that to me, they called me executive producer, which is a show that they destroy totally. The second time, I was just not line producer, I was the
Supervising producer.
supervising producer. When Bochco got to do it and really changed Hollywood's whole attitude about TV, that's when the whole showrunner kind of name started to happen. But that's what I was doing. They hired me because they wanted me to run the show and make it succeed. And before that, the attitude toward writers was keep them as far away from the set as you possibly could, because they're going to want to change everything and make it better, you know, instead of making it the way they wanted. So that's what was happening. And that was a good experience. I really enjoyed that.
On Flamingo Road.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you remember how you were asked to get involved with the show?
Well, I think I'm not sure anymore, but I think Aaron Spelling had something to do with it, and it was he must have told the producer of the show. I'm now blacking his name. Fileman, Michael Fileman. Thank you. That's what you're here for. Michael Fileman, who worked for a lot. So he hired me, and then I hired my son, and I was able to do that.
You might also mention that you wrote 5 or 6 TV movies, all of which were critical successes.
Yeah, I did all that.
Yeah,
before
we'll
that.
get back to the TV movies. So,
Yeah.
But we can talk about Flamingo Road now. Now that actually was based on a novel, wasn't it?
Yes, that was based on a novel. So was Peyton Place. So was Flamingo Road. I mean, so was Death Takes a Holiday. A number of the things I did were based on something.
Yeah.
And it was very successful because by then I was feeling frisky about being in the business, and they give me this stupid novel which is full of every cliche that you could ever find about the South, and say, make this into a soap opera. And I don't know whatever possessed me, but I finally must have just didn't care anymore whether I was fired or not. So I decided the way to do it was as a farce, and make it funny, and make it a comedy. And I never mentioned that to anybody, because I know they would have said no. So I just did it. And it was very funny, because all those cliches, we had every cliche. We had the bumbling bad guy who always smoking a cigar, and we had the good-looking guy and the young, good-looking girl. It was all done as comedy. And it was just great. And 2 years went by and I left the show. I don't know what the hell I was doing, but I kept doing that.
It was 2 years.
It's 2 years.
Your magic number.
My magic number, right.
So as showrunner, were you involved in all aspects?
Everything,
Casting?
including my favorite thing was getting actors out of the dressing room when they didn't want to come out. The first time I ever got to do that.
What was your trick?
I just walked in and said, "Get the hell on the set." There was no trick. And they did. And they listened to me. But it was so funny to me. Gee, why isn't she coming onto the set? We're waiting for her. And the actors used to do that a lot. But I didn't see any reason why they should. So I just went up and said, "Get out of there." It worked all the time. And everybody was having a good time because they were all in on the joke. And one newspaper reporter wrote the thing that I included in my book. He wrote this horrible review of the show and then said, if you don't love it, you're missing something wonderful. So he got it. Mm-hmm. And obviously the audience got it too, because the show was doing very well until the network decided to take it off and put on a show that was written by the head of the network's son. So I couldn't complain because I had my son on my show. So, I mean, nepotism goes on all in the world. You know, you look at a sign on a store, it says father and son, right? Or mother and son. Yep. So that was the end for me of that.
Now, did you hire writers on that show?
Yes,
then?
Of course, I did everything.
So what were you looking for in a writer? What did you like in a writer?
A sense of humor.
Mm-hmm. So you would get spec scripts from
I
them
got spec
and look
scripts,
for humor?
but I also did, and that's what I met my friend Frank Fiorino, who I'm still very good friends with. I called a meeting of any writers who thought they could write for the show, and I told them to come in the screening to see the pilot. And then I said, go home and then come up with an idea for the show, and I'll see if you're right for the show. And that's how I got a number of writers, including women writers. Surprise, surprise. Margaret Arman was one of them. Anyway, that was another good experience because it was really fun.
So let's back up then and talk about a few more of those TV movies. So you had mentioned earlier Death Takes a Holiday,
yeah,
1971.
That was a good one.
Yeah, so what do you recall about writing that?
Well, that was my first chance to write something serious based on something that had cachet. It was a very famous French play originally, and then it was a radio thing, and it had a lot of things done to it. And it was my first time to really do a class project, and I was really thrilled. And the producer, whose name I'm now forgetting also,
George Eckstein?
George Eckstein, had a very good career, doing very classy stuff on television. And I was very, very pleased that he called on me to write it. And he said, well, what are you going to do with it? It's a French farce. I mean, it's a French play about death coming to the world. So I came up with the concept, and he immediately jumped up and got excited. I said, think of the Kennedys. That's our royalty. And when they made the movie based on the same play, they used the same idea, the same concept that I had come up with a very powerful, rich family. And I never got to see that, go to the set of that movie. Anyway, it was a good experience.
Did you have a preference between writing TV movies or episodic television?
No, I loved writing the movies.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Why is that?
Because it was different than writing the same thing over and over again. Mm-hmm. I actually like both forms. They really were interesting to me.
Okay. So we're going to go ahead and take a short break, and then we'll pick up with the rookies.
Okay.
All right.